A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi zidni ilma. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammadin nabiyil ummi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa barik wa sallim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we have to start Surah Al-Anaam, verse number 41. Bal iyyahu tad'una fa yakshifu ma tad'una ilayhi in sha'a wa tansawna ma tushrikun. He is the one you will call out to, and he will remove the suffering from which you called out to him, if he please. Then you will forget those whom you had made partners with him. So this thing is repeated several times in the Quran in several different ways. Then when people are really caught in some affliction and they know that there's no way that they can get out on their own, then they start calling to the one God. But as soon as they are relieved, as soon as God saves them, then they start going back to their original faith and to their idols. So the hope here is that once God saves them, they will forget their false deities, and since they know that they have no benefit. وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمَمٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ فَأَخَذْنَاهُمْ بِالْبَأْسَاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَضَرَّعُونَ. So we sent messengers to nations before you, but when they transgressed, that is when the nations transgressed, we caught them with adversity and affliction so that they may plead humbly. So affliction, adversity and affliction are the Arabic words are abasa and darra. Some commentators think it also means poverty, and some think it means misfortune. And affliction has been explained that it could be illness or physical suffering. So when they are caught in some such difficult situation, then it is expected that they will plead humbly to God. And actually these sufferings and afflictions are all a means through which human beings are tested. These are trials. And one keeps coming across good things in life and difficult and bad things in life, even some evils, and these are all tests of faith. How firmly are we going to stand in our place? When they are blessed, they start becoming vain, and when adversity afflicts them, then people start despairing, as if there is no hope for them. But if one believes in God, then one knows that there is always hope. In fact, Hazrat Ibrahim a.s. is reported to have said in the Quran that being despairing is like being an unbeliever. A person who despairs completely, who does not have any faith in the mercy of God, then he has lost his faith. فَلَوْلَا إِذَا جَاءَهُمْ بَأْسُنَا تَضَرَّعُوا وَلَٰكِنْ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَزَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. Then why did they not ask humbly for forgiveness when our affliction came to them? Instead, their hearts became hardened, and Shaitan made their actions appear attractive to them. So when people do not believe, then whatever wrong they are doing, the Shaitan keeps putting this in their mind, this idea, this concept, that whatever they are doing is the right thing to do. So they start thinking what we are doing is the most attractive and desirable thing to do. And the more a person fails to respond with humility in front of God, then the more his heart becomes hardened. So that's like a vicious cycle, and he keeps getting more and more into that swamp, getting stuck in that swamp. فَلَمَّا نَسُوا مَا ذُكِّرُوا بِهِ فَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ أَبْوَابَ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ حَتَّى إِذَا فَرِحُوا بِمَا أُوتُوا أَخَذْنَاهُمْ بَغْتَةً فَإِذَا هُمْ مُبْلِسُونَ. So when they ignored the warnings they had been given, we opened all the doors of prosperity for them until when they started rejoicing at what they had been given, we caught them suddenly and they lost all hope. So they forgot the lesson that they should have learned from their adversity and affliction. That is, the change of fortune is a test in this world and does not necessarily mean a punishment or a reward. So sometimes actually, one wonders that whatever we're going through, is this a punishment or is this a trial? So, of course, in any case, the thing to do is to appeal to God to get you out of that situation. So, This is a ploy of Satan, a ploy of the shaitan, that whenever you're doing something which is not desirable in the eyes of God, then He makes it appear good to you. So they have been given these warnings which they did not heed. How did the warnings come? The warnings come first of all through the Quran, that if you read the Quran, then you're being warned all the time about the kind of things that you have to avoid. In so many different ways, the Quran repeats all these warnings. And then if they do not heed, then the doors of plenty are open for them. Plenty and prosperity are open for them. Like verses 42 and 44 is mentioning the ways of trying to get the unbelievers to give up their kufr, their unbelief. So one thing is that the Quran is recited to them, they can heed that. And another is that they are afflicted with suffering and trials, and some people do, sort of recover when they go through a suffering, and then they turn towards God. And the third is that the doors of plenty are open for them, and then a lot of people, instead of becoming grateful, they become vain, and they think that that what they were doing was good. That is why they have been rewarded. So they start rejoicing what they had been given. And then after that, God says, we caught them suddenly, and then they lost all hope. Mublisun is the word for becoming despondent. This is a kind of a regret, and then they are unable to speak in their own defense when they become despondent. And when you speak in your defense to God, then you sort of apologize, you ask for forgiveness. But then they are not even able to do that. فَقُطِعَ دَابِرُ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا وَالْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Totally destroyed by the roots was the nation which transgressed. All praise is due to God, who is the Lord of all the worlds. So when the punishment came to some really rebellious nations, then they were destroyed by the roots. That means they were totally eliminated. And we have heard and read about many of these nations who were totally destroyed. For example, the nation of Prophet Lut alayhi salam. Once I remember, a few sessions ago, we were discussing the Dead Sea, in which no life grows, because even under the sea there is so much life, but in the Dead Sea there is no life, because this is supposed to be the place where the people of the nation of Prophet Lut were destroyed. And just the other day I came across a video on Madain Saleh. That is, Saleh alayhi salam was sent to this nation, to a place called Madain or Madian, and those people asked him, all right, they challenged him, if you are a prophet, bring out a she-camel from this rock. And he warned them that if they didn't believe even after that, then they would be destroyed. But they were too haughty and vain, and they did not pay attention to his warning. So he did produce a she-camel, and then they were told that they would have to share all the resources of nature, like the water and the grazing of the grass, with their own animals and their people, with the she-camel. And they soon became tired of sharing, and then they killed the she-camel, and then they were destroyed. So they were destroyed to the roots. That means not even one person or even a little child was saved from that punishment. So they were destroyed by the roots was the nation which transgressed. All praise is due to God, who is the Lord of the worlds. And what I wanted to say further about this place is that now, like the Prophet had passed along with his companions when they were traveling, they had passed through some of these places, and he warned his people not to stay there. And also, if you pass a place like that, you keep asking for forgiveness, reciting astaghfar. But now the government has opened up this for the tourists. It's become a tourist spot. So let's see what happens. قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُمْ إِنْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ سَمْعَكُمْ وَأَبْصَارَكُمْ وَخَتَمَ عَلَى قُلُوبِكُمْ مَنْ إِلَٰهٌ غَيْرُ اللَّهِ يَأْتِيكُمْ بِهِ انظُرْ كَيْفَ نُصَرِّفُ الْآيَاتِ ثُمَّ هُمْ يَصْدِفُونَ. Say, Qul or say is being addressed to the Prophet mostly in the Quran, when he's been giving an answer to the objections of the unbelievers or the questions of the unbelievers, or if they were being informed about something. So the word Qul is used. So say to them, if God were to take away your power of hearing and your sight, and if he put a seal on your hearts, which God besides God would be able to restore them to you? See in how many ways, different ways, we present the signs, even then they turn away. Now the heart is the seat of spiritual understanding. Now, if you ask a doctor, what does the heart do? He will naturally explain all the physical functions and he will say, it's a pump which pumps the blood to the whole body and so on and so forth. That is why if one has a weak heart, whole body becomes weak because the blood is not being pumped properly. So here, but since time immemorial, the heart has been considered to be the seat of all spiritual understanding and of emotions. When people fall in love, they talk about the heart. They don't say, I've fallen in, that my head has fallen in love with you. Their heart has fallen in love. And I know it's taking away a little time, but it's a very interesting thing that once happened, that a group of, my friends, we used to gather together and study the Quran, and one of us was a doctor. And once she brought a whole report which had been published somewhere, in which it was mentioned that a young boy, a very young teenager, maybe 11 or 12 years old, he had an accident and he had to have a heart transplant. Or maybe, no, he didn't have an accident. He had to have a heart transplant because of his illness, and he was given the heart of a young boy of a similar age who had had an accident. His heart was given to him. And when this boy had recovered fully, then the parents noticed that he was behaving differently. So they also consulted their doctor and they said, we don't understand this. He likes all the things that he didn't like before, and he does things which he didn't do before. His tastes have changed, his feelings have changed, so many things have changed, so we don't understand this. So then they decided to talk to the parents of the boy who had died and whose heart this child was carrying. And then they discovered that all the things that he was doing differently were the things that the donor boy used to do. So you see that the heart is not only a pump. It is a pump, of course, but it is not only a pump. It is also the seat of spiritual understanding and feeling. And this is why from time immemorial people have been talking of the heart as being the seat of emotions and understanding. Now here it says, Unzur kaifa nusarriful ayat. That means, see in how many different ways we present the signs. Ayat are the signs of God. So you see in the Quran you will say, so many things are repeated over and over again, but every time whatever is repeated is being repeated in a slightly different way. Because it so happens that, one style might appeal to one person, some other thing might appeal to another person. So this goes on, and God does it consciously and He says it over and over again. See in how many different ways we present all these ways of the ayat, all the signs of God. And we present the signs, even then they turn away. And here again I'm reminded that I used to know this American lady who had accepted Islam on her own, at a mature age. And she said, when somebody told me that all the Muslims face in one direction and they pray at almost the same time and they're all facing the same direction, that she said, did something to me. And I at once accepted Islam. And there are so many different stories we hear, not really stories, they're actual, true cases of people to whom different things have appealed. And this is why the Quran keeps on repeating all these signs of God in different ways. And in the style of the Quran is also this fact that there are rational proofs, then there are historical proofs, that, all that the other nations did. And then God's mercy is also mentioned, and you will also find that as soon as there is mention of some harsh punishment, at once it is said, Wallahu Ghafurur Rahim. He is the much forgiving and He is the ever merciful. So, and also we mentioned in the beginning that the favorite qualities, attributes of God are Rahman and Rahim. That means Rahman is most merciful and Rahim is ever merciful. And He says in His Hadith Qudsi, Hadith Qudsi is a hadith in which God says something about Himself. And in this Hadith Qudsi it is said, my mercy precedes my wrath. The Arabic is Rahmati Sabaqat Ghadabi, which means my mercy precedes my wrath. قُلْ أَرَأَيْتَكُمْ إِنْ آتَاكُمْ عَذَابُ اللَّهِ بَغْتَةً أَوْ جَهْرَةً يُهْلِكُ إِلَّا الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمُونَ. Say, tell me, the punishment of God was to come suddenly or openly, who will be destroyed except the rebellious nation? So, this is how nations have been punished, that the punishment, when they exceed their time limit, when their reprieve is over, they have been warned so many times and they don't pay heed, and then the time is over, then the punishment comes suddenly. So the wrongdoers will lose both the worlds. They will not get, any benefit in this world and neither in the next world. Of course, the benefit of the next world is much more valuable than the benefit of this world, because that is everlasting and this is short-lived. And in this world, there is death for all the creatures that have been created, and in the next world, there is no death. So, the benefit of the next world is far greater than the benefit of this world. وَمَا نُرْسِلُ الْمُرْسَلِينَ إِلَّا مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنْذِرِينَ فَمَنْ آمَنَ وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. We do not send the messengers except as givers of good news and as warners. These two words are repeated innumerable times in the Quran, and they are mostly mentioned in connection with most of the prophets. Mubashirina wa munzirina. Bashir wa nazir. Bashir is somebody who gives you good news. It's also interesting that, how some of the terms and concepts we are coming across constantly in the Quran are also there in the Bible. So, this concept of the Prophet being a Bashir, a giver of good news, of good tidings. In fact, one of the editions of the Bible is known as the Good News Bible. And the good news that we believe in, according to the Quran, is that those who believe in God and they believe in the Prophet of their time, and they also believe in whatever the Prophet had taught, that so many prophets came before him and all that, and also in all the rituals and other things that he teaches us, then there is good news for them. Then he's a Bashir. But he's also a Nazir. Nazir means warner. Some people say he's the one who creates fear in you. Maybe yes, if you think about hell and all the other punishments, then it does create fear in you. But I like the term warner, because they are warning you in good time. You're still alive, and the prophets are warning you that this is not the right thing to do and not the right way to go, and this is the right way to go. So here it is said, we do not send the messengers except as givers of good news and warners. That means all the messengers were givers of good news and warners. For the one who comes to believe and reforms, so the belief, as we just said, that it is the heart which is the seat of spiritual understanding and emotional understanding. So the one who comes to believe, that means he is believing from the heart, and reforms. What you reform is mainly, you could also reform your beliefs, but here by reforms it meant the outward acts or deeds. So if we reform our deeds, and we have to believe correctly, and then we reform our deeds, then of course we will be rewarded. And for the one who does not believe and who does not reform himself, then of course there is a fear of punishment, spiritual punishment as well as physical. This is the reason why, since the belief resides in the heart, this is why the Quran has said over and over again that La ikraha fid deen, that there is no compulsion in religion. No one can be forced to say, you can't, catch a person and lock him up and say, you have to believe in this religion. So maybe that person, in order to save his life or to be, save himself from all the punishment, physical punishment that he might be given, he might utter the words of, disbelief or whatever he's being asked to say. But if his heart does not confirm that belief, then it is no use. Sometimes it happens that somebody wants to marry a person, and this other person says, if you come to my religion, then I will marry you. So that person says, okay, fine. But that person has not really believed in his heart. He's just saying it to achieve something. So it's very important that if you're trying to teach somebody something, then you have to appeal to their heart so that the belief will be embedded in their heart. وَالَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يَمَسُّهُمُ الْعَذَابُ بِمَا كَانُوا يَفْسُقُونَ. Those who denied our signs will be touched by punishment because they were disobedient. Now this is self-evident that they will be punished because of their disobedience. Islam, of course, means to be obedient. قُلْ لَا أَقُولُ لَكُمْ إِنِّي خَزَائِنُ اللَّهِ وَلَا أَعْلَمُ الْغَيْبَ وَلَا أَقُولُ لَكُمْ إِنِّي مَلَكٌ إِنْ أَتَّبِعُ إِلَّا مَا يُوحَى إِلَيَّ قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الْأَعْمَى وَالْبَصِيرُ أَفَلَا تَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Say, I do not, again say, قُلْ. The Prophet is being asked to repeat these things to the unbelievers. I do not say to you that I possess the treasures of God, nor do I possess knowledge of the unknown. I do not say that I am an angel. I do not follow anything but the revelation which is sent to me. Say, can the blind and the one with eyesight be equal? Do you not reflect? So, this is because the unbelievers kept asking for all kinds of miracles and saying, why aren't you a rich king? Why don't you wear bracelets of gold? Because in those days, the kings used to wear bracelets of gold and things like that. And all right, we'll believe even if you return this whole desert into a green, patch. And so they rejected Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's prophethood by saying that he was only a mortal like us. Now, this is something that the Prophet was asked to say to these people when they said, okay, show us this miracle. He was asked to say, Ana basharum mislakum, that is, I'm a mortal just like you. And who is a mortal? A mortal is one who has been born in this world and he will die in this world. And he eats food and he marries, and all these things are qualities of the mortals. That is, he's a human being. But the place, next time I'll give you the exact reference. When the Prophet says, "Revelation is sent to me," without any comma or full stop, the same sentence goes on that I'm a mortal like you and revelation is sent to me. Which means that, I have heard people saying that, he was just like us, or we are just like him. And that's I think is not the right thing to say, because he was far, far, far above us. And he himself, even when he is saying that I'm a mortal, he says, revelation is sent to me. So that an angel is coming to him from the heavens and giving him the words of God. So how can we compare ourselves to him? So here he says, I do not say to you that I possess the treasures of God. And also they said, this is also repeated several times in the Quran, Mata hazal wadu in kuntum sadiqin. That means, when will the time come? That is for the day of judgment. If you are truthful. If you are truthful, tell us when will that day come. But he always replied that the knowledge of this is with my Lord. No one knows about it. So he was unable to tell the time of the hour. In Arabic, the day of judgment is called as-sa'a. That means the hour. The hour is the day of judgment. And also they kept asking him to change the geography of the place, we'd like to see waterfalls and a green area and so on and so forth. And this is repeated several times in the Quran. And it is wrong to say that the Prophet didn't have any miracles, because he had miracles accompanying him. But he did not display them. And that is because this was, he was the last prophet, and the time had come when people were supposed to believe with their minds and not just to be overawed by a miracle. So he would say, I'm just a mortal, I can't do any miracles, but the miracles were accompanying him all the time. Then he said, I do not possess knowledge of the unknown. That, of course, the greatest thing that they asked for was the knowledge of the day of judgment. And he said, this is known only to God, but even besides that, I have no knowledge of the unknown. The Prophet did have knowledge of the unknown, but the prophets have only as much knowledge as God chooses to reveal to them. There are some very pious people who also start, you might say, you can't say revelation, but they're able to guess or be able to tell what's going to happen and things like that. Some slight knowledge of the unknown. And that again is because they worship God, they pray so much, and they love the Prophet, and they're just sort of absorbed in all this, then gradually they start sharing some of the knowledge of the unknown, which is of course very little compared to the knowledge of God. Right now, here when they were asking for the treasures of God, they wanted so much wealth, that it's inconceivable that anyone could have so much wealth. But because the Makkans were mainly focused on this world and on their worldly possessions. And this is something that I think most people in the world are focused on, simply on worldly possessions. Now, there's nothing wrong with worldly possessions and working hard to earn some wealth in this world. It's only the way we earn it should be halal, and also the way we spend it should also be halal, and the way that is recommended by God. Another reason why they did not want to believe in the Prophet ﷺ as being the last prophet was because they were surrounded by people, by human beings who had a very low moral character. So they thought that was their concept of a human being, and they thought that a human being couldn't be a prophet. So they said, why wasn't an angel sent as a prophet? Or why wasn't he accompanied with an angel? And what they didn't understand was, they didn't want to know, was that if an angel had accompanied the prophet, then that angel would have to come in the shape of a human being. Otherwise, they would not be able to bear his appearance. Because we think of angels as being very innocent looking. They are innocent otherwise, but they are not innocent looking. They can really frighten a person if a person happened to see them. So even Jibreel a.s., a couple of times he came in the presence of other people, and he came in the form of a man. So if the angel had come in the form of a man, then again they would have said, this is a man, how do we know he's an angel? So if a person doesn't want to believe, then he can have, endless arguments. So the thing that the commentators and other people have, the conclusion that they give is that no human being should come to believe for the sake of material gain in mind. And one should come to believe with the realization that is the truth. And also, if anything is to be desired from the faith, then it should be a higher spiritual station and closeness to God. And also, the greatest thing, I think, is success in the hereafter. وَأَنْزِرْ بِهِ الَّذِينَ يَخَافُونَ أَنْ يُحْشَرُوا إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِمْ لَيْسَ لَهُم مِّن دُونِهِ وَلِيٌّ وَلَا شَفِيعٌ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. Warn those who are afraid of being gathered to the Lord. Anzir, Nazir is used here. Warn those who are afraid of being gathered to the Lord, when there will be for them neither friend nor intercessor, except God, so that they might become pious. So the prophets, especially the Prophet ﷺ, will be intercessors on the day of judgment. Intercessor is one who speaks on somebody else's behalf to forgive him. Now, of course, there are, Hazrat Muhammad ﷺ will be placed at the station of praise, which is known as the Maqam Mahmud. On the day of judgment, that will be the highest position, highest place or highest rank among human beings. And he will go into a long sajda. And then he will be asked to rise, and then he will be asked to perform intercession. But intercession will be performed only for those people for whom God's permission is given. So God is going to recommend who you can intercede for, and He's also going to be the one who will accept the intercession. So eventually, the actual intercessor will be God. Now, according to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, the Quran will also be an intercessor, because you are being warned through the Quran, and if you have been reading the Quran and if you have been following it, then the Quran will also become an intercessor for us on the day of judgment. We are on verse 52, in case somebody wants to know. وَلَا تَطْرُدِ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاوَةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ مَا عَلَيْكَ مِنْ حِسَابِهِمْ مِنْ شَيْءٍ وَمَا مِنْ حِسَابِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنْ شَيْءٍ فَتَطْرُدَهُمْ فَتَكُونَ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. Do not reject those who call out to the Lord morning and evening, desiring His pleasure. There is no accountability on you from their account at all, and there is not the least accountability on them from your account. If you turn them away, that is, if you turn the believers away, you will be of the unjust. Now, the background to this is that, as we have already discussed with the Makkans, the unbelieving Makkans were also believers. In the end, they all believed. But we are referring to this historical time when they did not believe, and they were the biggest enemies of the Prophet. And they were obsessed with their worldly status. The leaders among the Makkans were obsessed with their worldly status. And whenever the Prophet, invited them, they would say, if they ever, felt that they, on their own, they wanted to come and talk to the Prophet, they would say, remove all these, poor, ill-dressed, uncouth people from your presence, then we'll come to see you. And sometimes, because of racial prejudice, because the Prophet would also be surrounded by some of the poor freed slaves, the slaves who had been freed, like Hazrat Bilal. Now, Bilal was an African who had been made a slave, and then he was tortured by his master, and then he was bought by, I think, Hazrat Abu Bakr, and he was freed. And this was considered a good deed. It was also an expiation for many sins to free a slave. So the Muslims were doing this all the time, and gradually this brought an end to slavery. Then there was one poor companion called Khabib, and there was Salman Farsi. He was from Persia, and he had come all the way looking for somebody who would teach him the right religion. And in the middle, he had reached some country where he was taught Christianity, and then somebody, of course, made him a slave, and then he was freed, and he became a very highly respected companion of the Prophet Salman Farsi. In fact, when the Ghazwa Khandaq was fought, the war of the trench, or the battle of the trench, then his advice had been followed about how they should, when the Prophet came to know that the Makkans were going to come and attack Medina with a large, well-armed force, then Salman Farsi's advice was followed of digging a trench on the sensitive side of the city. So anyway, since they were believers, and very firm believers, they were highly respected in the Muslim community. But the Makkans used to say, remove all these slaves from your presence, these poor people, then we'll come and talk to you. And according to Al-Razi, even if the Prophet briefly thought of sending them away, his intention was good, and he could have attended to them later, like the believers later, with no spiritual harm occurring to them. But as soon as they said this, maybe, we don't know, maybe the Prophet said, okay, let's see, if these leaders accept Islam, then all their followers will also accept Islam, and the enmity will be over. But before he could do anything about it, Jibreel alayhi salam brought this revelation: do not reject those who call out to the Lord morning and evening. So how are they calling out to the Lord? They are morning and evening, that means the whole day. First of all, they are saying their 5-time daily prayers, and then they do the zikr and remembrance. The zikr, as we know, there's innumerable ways in which you can do zikr. There's so many formulae, all the names of the Asma al-Husna, the beautiful names of God, and there are so many verses in the Quran, so many phrases in the Quran that people repeat, and that is known as zikr or remembrance. So these people were all the time worshipping God and doing extra voluntary worship. A learned word for voluntary or nafli ibadah is supererogatory. So they were involved in all this all the time. Now here it is said, there is no accountability on you from their account. There is not the least accountability on them from your account. That means whatever the Makkans are doing, you are not responsible for. Like the Prophet used to feel so deeply involved in these things, and he wanted to bring all these people to the right faith. But so many times in the Quran is being told that your work is just to convey the message. So since these were proud leaders and they were doing whatever they wanted to do, the Prophet will not be asked why he could not bring them to faith. وَكَذَلِكَ فَتَنَّا بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لِيَقُولُوا أَهَؤُلَاءِ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنْ بَيْنِنَا أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَعْلَمَ بِالشَّاكِرِينَ. So this is how we put through a trial, some by means of others, so they might say, are these the people on whom God has bestowed his favors from amongst us? Is God not well aware as to who are the grateful? It has been said that everyone is tried by the person in front of him. By the person in front of him means all the people that we are coming in contact with. It might be, within the family, the husband and wife, they are coming in contact with all the time, day and night, and then they are a trial for each other. Because, one person has been brought up somewhere else, the others have been brought up somewhere else, and they might want to do different things. So they are all the time, they are a trial for one another. Similarly, siblings are a trial for one another. Even though they have been brought up in the same house, still they might think differently. So they can also become a trial. Then all the people that we meet, people go to work and then they have their colleagues and their bosses, and all these people are a trial for each other. So then your neighbors could become a trial for you because sometimes they're doing things which disturb you and you don't know how to talk to them because you want to be in good relations. So this is how we put through a trial, some by means of others, so that they might say, now here this is referring to the special case in Makkah. Are these the people on whom God has bestowed his favors from amongst us? So when these Makkans, the proud leaders, would see the poor believers, they would say, these believers keep saying that God has blessed us, that we have come to faith. So is this the way that God blesses people? Are these the people on whom God has bestowed his favors from amongst us? So they, saw the difference in power and wealth, and all these things are a trial for everyone. The wealthy are tested in their responsibility towards the needy, and the needy are tested in their humble acceptance of charity, and also in trying to cope with their circumstances and still, knowing that which is the right path for us to take. So the Makkans, besides other prejudices, they also had a racial prejudice. At one time, racial prejudice was not considered so bad, but now the whole world is talking about racialism, that you're not supposed to consider somebody inferior if he comes from a different race. وَإِذَا جَاءَكَ الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِآيَاتِنَا فَقُلْ سَلَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ كَتَبَ رَبُّكُمْ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةَ أَنَّهُ مَنْ عَمِلَ مِنْكُمْ سُوءًا بِجَهَالَةٍ ثُمَّ تَابَ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ وَأَصْلَحَ فَإِنَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. When they who believe in our signs come to you, say, Salam upon you. God has ordained upon himself mercy. Whoever among you commits a fault unknowingly and is penitent after that and reforms, know that he is the much forgiving, the ever merciful. Now this is about the greeting Salam. But this same root word is Islam. And most often this word is Salam is translated as peace. Salam upon you means peace. But I always used to think there is more to it than just peace. And then I came across the word wellness, salamti, being well in every possible manner. Now, Muhammad Asad says that peace means the ethical shunning of evil that brings peace, and freedom from moral conflict is peace. Now, I just said that I like the word wellness, like being well in every possible way, and I sort of, looked it up and it said it means physical wellness, spiritual wellness, social wellness, environmental wellness, emotional wellness, intellectual wellness, occupational wellness, and wellness in the quality of life. So this sort of almost covers everything that we that happens to us, or that we are faced with, or that is within us. So that means that Salam, when we say Salam Alaikum, we are wishing each other all these forms of wellnesses and also, of course, peace and mercy. God has ordained upon himself mercy. This sentence or phrase is also repeated several times in the Quran. Kataba Rabbukum ala nafsihi rahma. That means no one has asked him to be merciful, and no one can force him, of course, and he has ordained upon himself mercy. Whoever among you commit then we do it well. And God has imposed upon himself being merciful to his creatures. And whoever commits a fault unknowingly and is penitent after that and reforms, then you should know that God is the Ghafurur Rahim. He is the much forgiving and he is the ever merciful. وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ وَلِتَسْتَبِينَ سَبِيلُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. This is how we explain in detail the signs so that the path of the criminals is distinguished. Now, we are talking about the Quran, and the Quran mentions the sins and the punishments for them. Then why are we talking about the mujrimeen, the criminals? This is because according to the Quran, the law of the land should be the law of the Quran, and therefore anyone who is a sinner is a criminal and a criminal is a sinner. There is no difference in these two words, because the law of the Quran or the law of God is supposed to be the law of the land. When you sin against yourself, it can be a hidden sin which nobody knows about. But if you commit a sin against yourself which everybody knows about, then that also becomes a crime. For example, if somebody tries to commit a suicide, and if that in that country suicide is considered a crime, then that person will be considered a suspect. He will be caught and he will have a case against him for having committed a crime. The question is that if a person is punished physically by the law of the land for not saying his prayers, then is that justified? This is something between you and your God. If a person is not saying a prayer or his prayers and not fasting or other rituals, then this is between you and your God. And also, if you're not fasting, then it's also very difficult to prove it. Even if you're not going to the mosque, you could have said your namaz at home, and how can anyone prove that you have not done it? Anyone from the outside? I think it's going a little to the extremes. If the government starts punishing you for all the little things that you're supposed to follow in your religion, I think that is going too far. But otherwise, if you consider on the larger scale, there is this crime of murder or theft and all these things, or rape. And in these things, the law of the land should follow. If they are followers of the Quran and of the Prophet, then they should follow the law of the Quran, of the law of God. But there is also this thing that there's so much choice that people have been given by the different codifications or the different interpretations of the law by the different imams. And then they say, I follow Imam so-and-so, so I do not believe in this. This happened once that this girl wanted a divorce and she ran away from home. And in that community, they thought that asking for a divorce by a girl was a great sin, or it was a crime against their community. It was not a crime against the state. Anyway, so they came and killed the girl, wherever she was at that time. So what I'm trying to say is that this was another case, and another case was that the father said that I belong to such and such school of law, I follow Imam so-and-so, therefore according to my interpretation, what she is doing is wrong, she is asking for a divorce, and then the case went on and on. So it can create complications, but in countries where all the people are following one school of law, then there is no problem. But I also feel that this is a kind of a choice that you have been given, that you can follow any of these imams, because that is not the word of God. The codification of the law is an interpretation by these highly spiritual, very well-learned imams who interpreted it according to their own thinking and intelligence and their knowledge. No, this is my interpretation. The Quran says, وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ وَلِتَسْتَبِينَ سَبِيلُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. This is how we explain in detail the signs so that the path of the criminals is distinguished. We just talked about the word نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ, going into detail to explain all these ayat. The Quran explains in detail so that the criminals, the path of the criminals might become distinguished. This is what I was trying to say, was that mujrim in today's world is a criminal of the state, and sinner is somebody who has sinned against God and his faith. But according to the language of the Quran, it means the same thing, whether you're a sinner or you're a mujrim. قُلْ إِنِّي نُهِيتُ أَنْ أَعْبُدَ الَّذِينَ تَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ قُلْ لَا La attabi'u ahwaakum qad dalaltu izan wa ma ana min al-muhtadin. Say, again, saying to the Prophet to say to these other people, the non-believers, I have been forbidden to worship those whom you worship instead of God. This is like the first qul in which it is said, Qul ya ayyuhal kafiruna la a'budu ma ta'buduna. That is, I do not worship, or I have been forbidden to worship those whom you worship instead of God. And say, I do not follow your wishes. I would be truly lost if I did. I would not be of the rightly guided. So this is something quite clear. Tad'una is the word here in Arabic that it literally means to call out, and it actually means either to worship or to pray to someone. So it is said here that because the Makkans used to keep coming to the Prophet with all kinds of offers. Once they said, all right, we'll believe in your one God, but then you also have to believe in our idols, and 1 year together we will worship your God, and the next year you will worship with us, you will worship our idols. So that is why these words keep appearing in the Quran. The Prophet was told to say that I have been forbidden to worship those whom you worship instead of God. They said if you want wealth, we can give you all the wealth that you want. If you want to marry a certain woman, we'll arrange for it. But the Prophet said, no, this is impossible. He expressed it very clearly. And he said, if I follow your wishes, I would be truly lost if I did, and I would not be of the rightly guided. I think we shall keep this up to here. Let us say our little prayer. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina azaban nar wa adkhilna al-jannata ma'al abrar ya azizu ya ghaffar ya rabbil alameen bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Ameen summa ameen. As I've said earlier, half of this is from the Quran, and I should translate that. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanatan. That is, O Lord, give us the best in this world, wa fil akhirati hasanatan, and the best in the hereafter, wa qina azaban nar, and save us from the punishment of the fire. Ameen summa ameen. This is a very comprehensive prayer, and it sort of covers everything that we pray for. Thank you everyone for your time, and inshallah, we'll see you next week. Allah Hafiz. Jazakallah khair.